Hey everyone, just a quick note before we get started here. Austin and I originally recorded this episode way back in May of 2020, just a few weeks after the game came out. Keeping that in mind, we hope you are as excited as we are about the upcoming release of Rebirth, and we hope you enjoy our take on a game gone by, Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Welcome back to Games Gone By. I am your host, Austin Baskell, the gaming expert and enthusiast. And with me, as always, the person who's normally doing this hosting job, Adam Baskell. How's it going today?
It's going great, man. I was thinking you could call me like the eternal pessimist and self-inflicted torturer of games or something, because
that is
swear to
very
God,
accurate.
I have the most love-hate relationship with every game I play.
That is going to be a common trend for this podcast, I feel like. Especially on today's episode, where we're talking about Final Fantasy VII Remake. A brand new game. This is definitely the newest game that we've done so far. It only came out like 3 weeks ago. I wrapped it up about 2 weeks ago. And you just finished it up yesterday.
Yep.
What were your expectations coming into this game?
So I knew that they were going to change a lot of things, right? And I wanted them to. And you and I have talked about this off the show. It's like that game had already been made. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put 6 years and hundreds of millions of dollars into just remaking it, right? Or retreading it, I guess I should say. So I expected a lot of changes. I wanted a brand new battle system for sure, and oh boy, did they deliver. I expected some anime campiness for sure. I'm convinced that if the original was voice acted, I would have never played it. So, it's a lot of it was what I expected. I think some parts were a little bit of a letdown, but I think the parts that surprised me a lot more than the parts that let me down.
I can agree with that. I think we'll see that I'm a little less disappointed than you overall, but the game's highs are just so high that you can overlook a lot of the like smaller things that may have bothered you, because especially the combat is just so incredibly good.
The combat, and we'll get into this more in depth, but the combat is just it's just out of this world, man. I remember reading a Reddit thread a couple years ago where people are saying, I really just want this to be like an HD remake of the original. I don't see any need to change the battle system. Oh my God, I'm so glad they changed it. Like, what a waste that would have been.
Right. Turn-based combat like Final Fantasy VII originally did just doesn't hold up in the modern era, I think, as well as it did back then. There's still some games that do it, like the Persona series is pretty famous for still sticking to turn-based combat, and they have done some things to innovate. But most turn-based combat, classic JRPG style, is just so slow, and like it doesn't work in 2020 as well. So I think it would have been really out of place if they had stuck with that.
A lot of it, I'm convinced, was really just like a technical limitation, right? There's only so much you could do with the consoles back at the time. Having everything kind of exist separately and activate in a turn-based manner. And don't get me wrong, they very much made it their own thing, and it became a stylistic decision. But I'm glad they did not anchor themselves to that archaic system.
I agree. And before we go too deep into any of the specific systems of this game, I just kind of want to see what your experience with Final Fantasy VII as a whole, as a franchise,
Yeah, so I played the original game back when I was probably like 15 or so, maybe a little earlier than that. At least 15 years ago at this point. I beat the hell out of it on my second playthrough. Like the first time I went through, I don't even think I got Vincent, right? Like I just missed a whole lot of stuff.
Oh, wow.
Especially at the time, there's no YouTube Let's Plays. Like I'm pouring over 100-page documents on GameFAQs, right? So,
right.
But the second time I went through, there's literally nothing in that game I didn't do, right? Got every ultimate weapon, every limit, the golden chocobo, every summon.
All those emerald weapons, ruby weapons, all those guys.
And it's a great game. It's definitely one of those like defining games of my childhood. A lot of nostalgia wrapped up with it. So I was definitely I was a little like skeptical coming into this. There's no way I'm going to enjoy this as much. And I definitely didn't enjoy it in the same ways, but I think I may have enjoyed it just as much. But other than that, I hadn't really played any of the supplemental stuff. I think I rolled my eyes all the way through Advent Children at some point. But I hadn't really played any of the almost like FF7 extended universe, you could call it.
Right.
I'm not really familiar with any of that. So it was pretty much just very thorough playthroughs of the original game.
And my experience with Final Fantasy VII as a whole is very different than yours.
Mm-hmm.
I had played the original back when I was probably like 7 or 8. That had been in the early 2000s, I guess like 2003 or so. Maybe got to the second reactor, and so I never really got much further than that. My first real exposure to FF7 was Advent Children. I think it was because I had played Kingdom Hearts, and I knew Final Fantasy from Kingdom Hearts, mostly.
That's interesting.
I saw Advent Children, I was like, oh, Final Fantasy VII, I know that thing from Kingdom Hearts. So I watched Advent Children, and as a dumb kid, I was like, yeah, Advent Children's great. Look at all this cool action and all the cool shit going on.
Look at the swords and the black jacket.
Right, exactly. It was so edgy and cool as, a 7-year-old kid or whatever.
Right.
I'd say about 5 years ago, I went through, on PSP actually, I got the PS1 Classics version on PSP and played through all of Final Fantasy VII. And that was my first full experience with Final Fantasy VII. Of course, I knew a lot of the story and stuff from various other sources, just watching videos and knowing general game knowledge. I had a lot of exposure to it. But the first time I actually fully played it was only 5 years ago or so. So my expectations going into Final Fantasy VII were a little bit different. I was very excited from not as much of a nostalgic look, because I wanted to see what new stuff they would do and kind of how they would change the story and elevate it, hopefully, instead of just kind of going beat for beat. Because whenever they said this is going to be a 3-part or 2-part or 4-part, we still don't know the number of parts, but it's important to note that this game is only the first 5 to 6 hours of Final Fantasy VII. It's only the Midgar section of that first game. So I wanted to see what they were going to do to lengthen that and make it feel like a full game. And in my opinion, I think they did a pretty good job of it most of the time.
Yeah, I remember looking this up because I was like, how long is Midgar? And I saw everything between 5 and 10 hours, right? So I guess it really depends on how long you kind of spend there in the original. But yeah, no, I'm with you. I obviously had some nostalgia tied to it, but I was also excited to see the changes because I knew they were going to, and I absolutely agree that they should. You can't anchor yourself to something created over 20 years ago at this point. What a waste of resources that would be.
There's a lot of purist mentality out there that was make the same game just with new graphics and that's it. And I think that would have been insane. That'd have been such a, like you said earlier, a wasted opportunity. And even just from a story perspective, the way you can flesh out the world and the characters and add stuff to it, why would you want to stick to this very rigid structure?
Yeah, because some stuff is definitely left either confusing or ambiguous from the original, right? And whether that's a translation issue or just a storage space issue or whatever it might have been. I mean, the game was on 3 damn CDs or something.
Yeah.
There was a lot they could tinker with, and I think more often than not they did a good job with it. I certainly have some moments where I'm just I don't even have an opinion on this because I don't know what the hell I just watched. But
there's definitely a lot of that.
Yeah. But no, I think they did a pretty good job, and we'll definitely get into that.
I think we should start getting into it right now. Let's dive into, I think the story is probably a good place to start and just kind of talk about what this game covers and what new stuff they add to it. And I think one of the major things that this game had to do was flesh out Avalanche and the crew that you were with. If you were going to spend 40 hours in Midgar, then you had to make those characters who you spent that time with feel more alive and more real. And you had to do that for the rest of the world, too, with the slums and the sectors that you were in. For most of the first game, it's 2 or 3 screens, static screens that you walk through, and that's it. In this game, all of these areas are so big and open, and there's a lot of things going on. And while there's maybe not a ton of interactivity in all these spots, there's still a lot of world around them. And so I thought they did a really good job of making that stuff feel fleshed out. Whereas in the first game, it's here's a few screens and then you're done.
So
how did you feel about the world building of those early areas?
So I think we're already coming to our first point of mild disagreement.
There's going to be a lot of that.
I never got a sense of scale from any part of this game until probably the Shinra headquarters. Like, I think, and it may have just been the fact that, like, you always see exactly where you can go in the little mini map, and it's just very confined. And obviously, like, yes, if you go back to the original, it's essentially the same thing, because there's really only so many places you can go on any of these pre-generated backdrops, right? And literally when you move forward, it's like your character size just grows bigger. It's a really kind of silly technical limitation they did a good job with. But I think some of those backdrops were just so detailed and so expansive, and even though they're kind of a 2D image, there's just so many parts of this game where I would look up and be like, that's ugly and boring, and like, where are the flashing lights and the smokestacks and the weird cyberpunk things that I would expect them to be able to do in the year 2019, right? Or 2020. Wow, it's 2020.
It is.
And I don't think that was the case everywhere. Like, I thought the actual reactors were really cool. I thought the Shinra Tower was really good. I thought the end, just looking out over Midgar, was awesome. But like the slums and Wall Market and the junkyard, I don't know. I really felt like I was in a very cramped, confined space. So that was kind of hit or miss with me.
I can understand that, especially in like sectors 5, like sector 7, and I think it was sector 5 that Aerith was from.
Yeah.
Or was it 6?
I can't remember. They're all the same, man.
I can't either. I think it was 5. To a degree, though.
One of them gets crushed.
Like,
that's its defining characteristic. So
I can agree with it in like sector 5, maybe sector 7. The actual environments weren't, like, they all kind of look the same. It was all like ramshackle huts and stuff. Yeah. But I thought all of the characters kind of talking about what was going on in the world around them was really neat. Especially how they would change with every conversation.
Yeah.
Like, every time a big major event would happen, all of those characters would start talking about something new related to that thing. When the tower would fall, everybody would start talking about that. Whenever you blew up a reactor, everyone would talk about the latest reactor explosion. And I thought that was really cool. It made it feel like all these characters were really living in this world and reacting to what you were doing as Avalanche. And every time I'd walk out of a building, I'd look up and see that, huge Shinra plates above you. And I felt like I got way more of a sense of scale than I ever did in the first one. Because I would look up and see, like, oh, Midgar is literally on top of me. Like, I'm looking up at this metropolis that's above me. And I'm down below, like, insignificant and just, like, the size of an ant.
That's fair enough. I think a lot of it, like, Wall Market felt like a long hallway to me, right? And I think that's just the result of the design, because it really is a straight line to, like, Corneo's mansion.
It is a line with a couple little branching paths. Yeah. I definitely agree with that as far as the actual structural layout of it. But I always felt like there was something to see and something new to look at. And like all the lights and the environment of Wall Market was just always bustling and stuff going on, especially at night.
The night scenes were pretty good. So in the original, I don't know if you know this, but in Disc 3, literally every single NPC in the game has a different line of dialogue because they're reacting to the meteor in the sky, which is crazy because who went back and talked to 90% of those people, right? So that was a lot of effort for nothing but just world building to like 5 people. But it's cool to see them kind of carry that spirit forward, because you are right that there's a lot of different, like the NPCs say different things based on what happened. They'll be like, oh, did you hear about that explosion? Or there's one guy like complaining about how awful Avalanche is because he's bought into the propaganda. Although you are actual terrorists, so, it's hard to...
Yeah, and they do lean into that in this story at several moments. They, especially just kind of talking to the people around you and the world around you, everybody's talking about how, like, man, Avalanche sucks. Stop blowing up stuff that's giving us energy and helping us live our normal lives. And even Tifa at times struggles with that thought of being this terrorist and this, like, almost the bad guy in a lot of ways. Even though Shinra is, like, really the big bad guy. But to the common folk, you're kind of the bad guy.
It's not exactly like morally gray or anything. You're very much the good guy and they're the bad guy. But they do explore that a lot more in the original, where I don't think there's even so much as like lip service to the fact that, like, yeah, you're partly responsible for all this suffering right now, right? And granted, I think they do change the fact that part of the explosion in the first reactor is caused by Shinra, which I think that wasn't done in the first reactor in the original, maybe by the second. And, the pillar collapsing, of course, right?
Right, that's definitely all
So they
Uncharted.
start the whole like Shinra propaganda phase earlier and develop that more, which I think was a good touch. They there is a really awesome scene where Barrett's like leaning over this rubble, like, oh, where's Biggs and Jesse, and Tifa's like, we did this. I was really excited at that point, but then they never really did much with it after that. I felt it was a little underdeveloped, but I have to applaud them for kind of taking that chance because it was a little too straightforward in the original to where like, no, you are actually terrorists and no one seems to point that out. Like,
Right, like no one really cares that you just blew up the source of energy and probably
yeah.
killed somebody. Like maybe not a ton of people. And I thought like this was really evident in as early as the second chapter. Whenever you're walking through the plate after you've blown it up, you're technically on the Midgar plate, not in the slums, and you see all of this chaos, the fire, the collapsed buildings, the people scrambling around. Like that was the first time, even as early as chapter 2, where I was like, whoa, you're really like you're really ruining people's lives with this. Like, yeah, you're the good guy, but people are losing their homes and their city is on fire and all of their comfort and safety is probably gone now. And I thought that was pretty cool for them to even try and show that.
There's a really awesome segment from that perspective where you're controlling Aerith walking through the aftermath of this, and people are in a panic and they're scrambling and they're running away, and you pick up this child, and like, my God, did I hate having my sprint taken away from me, because every single time they did it in this game, I wanted to throw my controller at the wall. But like, as far as the emotional impact of that scene, it really just shows you that like, yeah, like this pillar has collapsed. And it's tragic to a lot more than just Avalanche. And, in the original, that was a technical limitation as much as anything. You couldn't have a ton of NPCs everywhere. But in this one, you really do get a much better sense in that moment of, like, this is awful. This killed a lot of people, and people are in just, like, a mad state of panic.
And I think a lot of that is credited to how they fleshed out not just the world, but also, like, the characters that weren't as fleshed out at the beginning. Biggs, Wedge, Jesse. They added new characters to the slums, like Marl, who is the like landowner for your little apartment thing that you were staying in, and all of the people in Wall Market, like Madam M and Chocobo Sam, like all of these new characters. And while I don't think all of them necessarily hit the mark, like I didn't care about every single one of them. Just the fact that I remember all their names and they were never in the first game, I think is a testament to like I cared about them at least a little bit. Especially your main crew with Avalanche. Biggs, Wedge, and Jesse were all perfect to me in this game. They took these like blank slate characters that just had a few lines of dialogue that were, whatever, like they're your buddies, we don't really care about them, and made them really cool characters in this game.
I agree for the most part, particularly the Avalanche members. I mean, as annoying as I found Wedge most of the time, the three characters there, right? Biggs, Wedge, Jesse, they really do develop a lot. They're a lot more integral to the story. In this game, I'm pretty sure in the original they make no reference to the fact that you're like an Avalanche cell, right? Like you were like Avalanche, right?
Right. In the original, it seems very much like you are the entire thing, but in this game, you are a cell, just a part of it.
And they do a lot for your cell, right? They develop those three characters along with Barrett and Marlene, a lot more, and that's cool. If you hadn't, I already forgot her name. I was going to say, if you hadn't said her name, I wouldn't have been able to tell you what it was. I found a lot of the extraneous NPCs to be meh. The one I actually really did like was the guy in he looks like a freaking Pokemaster, Leslie.
Leslie?
The gray-haired dude. I liked him a lot. His story was kind of interesting, and they didn't dwell on it too long, and it was just like a simple but convincing explanation of why someone on the inside was trying to help you. And it added a lot to like, yeah, of course, a weird, creepy old man that takes the most beautiful women from the city and they're never seen again. Yeah, he's going to have some resistance, right?
Right.
Like he's going to have some people want to rebel against that. Whereas in the first game, I don't really think that was a thing.
Yeah, there definitely was this sense that there was more elements to every character. Like Corneo, like you were saying, in the first game, he's just the old pervy dude who steals women, and he was a lot of comic relief and just kind of this character for you to not like, but not really be a big villain. And this game, you see, even with his like three subjects, Madame M, Chocobo Sam, and I think Andrea, was the guy from the Honeybee Inn.
Yes.
Even those three characters seem to not feel super comfortable with their position helping Corneo. Like, they're doing it because they have to, but they don't really want to. And I think that was kind of cool to see more of these characters having this resistance and having these different complicated relationships with everybody that wasn't just your main group of people.
Yeah, Corneo is basically like a dictator of Wall Market, right? And
Right.
every dictator has its middle management. And so it was cool to see them explore that because no like dictator runs the thing by himself. And a common thing amongst dictators are that their middle management basically play in these power games with each other. And if the dictator doesn't keep them happy, they're going to start to think about overthrowing too, right? And no, it wasn't like super developed, but you could really see these threads through the whole thing because these characters, they're like, yeah, we work for Corneo, but we'll help you out, Cloud, because like it's not like we love the guy. And I enjoyed those three characters a lot. I mean, I was not a fan of almost anything Andrea was doing, but the fact that he was just part of that kind of big three, and there's different side quests, and I think different choices you make decides who actually eventually helps you get in the manor, and there's definitely some cool things going on there. I would still say Wall Market is probably like the first time through it is my least favorite part of the whole game.
And that's crazy to me because it's definitely one of my favorite parts, but it's definitely something this game tries to do a lot, is give you new elements to really learn these characters. Like Chapter 4 is entirely focused on your Avalanche crew. This is not a thing that happens in the first game, but like you go to visit Jesse's parents and you like sneak into her house and you see that her dad has like this Mako poisoning and stuff, and like all of these elements that are thrown into this chapter that aren't in the first game. And I thought that was very cool to see these new elements of these characters, and it really helps you learn more about them. Even with the Wall Market stuff, there's a whole chapter that kind of doesn't really happen in the first game, at least not in the same way. And so it gives you a chance to learn more about these characters and the world around them.
So one of my complaints with Wall Market, I think we'll go ahead and kind of segue into some of the side quests in this game. And it isn't that these side quests are necessarily any worse than any other game that tries to do side quests. It's more of just that knowing how hard side quests are to do properly, I wish they hadn't bothered. I don't think most of them land very well, which isn't to say none of them do. I think the Angel of the Slums one is kind of cool. But then,
I'll say that I think a lot of the later game side quests work better than a lot of the earlier stuff. Like the two sectors, to me, I think are the worst of the side quests. The Sector 7 side quest at the beginning, and then the Sector, I think, 5 side quests with Aerith are some of the worst to me. But personally, I really thought the Wall Market ones and the ones at the end where it's kind of the whole world opens up, I thought most of those landed for me.
I think in general wasn't a big fan of the portion of the game where it was like you and Aerith for 8 hours. By you, I mean Cloud, right? I always think of myself as Cloud, I guess, because he's the sort of the main character, and you almost always have him in your party, although not always. What I didn't care for was, so in the original game, when you get the dress, right, basically you kind of hatch the idea. I think it's mostly Eris, and she's like, we got to get these ingredients to get the parts of the dress we need. So you do a couple little fetch quests, you get the ingredients, you move on. It's not overly compelling or complicated, but it's related to what you're doing. In here, they took the exact same steps and just made it a side quest of absolutely no consequence, and I don't know why they did that. It felt really weird to me, because it's almost functionally identical, except they completely divorced it from obtaining the dress. You know what I mean?
To me, I understand what you're saying. I think to me, though, what they did instead was made the main story the cool arena battle, where that was kind of your method to getting the dress. And then, of course, the Honeybee Inn stuff, but whereas in the first game, it was like, let's collect all these elements. In this game, it was, let's do this cool-ass arena battle. And then you get Aerith's dress, and then Aerith is talking to Madame M. Of course, off-screen, you don't see this, but it's heavily implied that Madame M comes up with the idea of you getting the dress from Andrea at the Honeybee Inn. So, like, it still has relevance, but now it's a cool arena battle instead of all of the weird little fetchy quest stuff, and you don't have to do the fetch stuff now if you don't want to.
I guess that makes sense because the original plan in this game is Aerith is going to go in with a dress, and that's what you're kind of working toward. And then kind of last minute, I think she realizes, but maybe I don't go in there without the guy with the 10-foot long sword.
Right, so, the 10-foot long sword would definitely help.
Yeah.
And kind of while we're talking about all this, I just kind of get a read on what are your thoughts on the main characters in general, since we're talking about Aerith and Cloud and a lot of their interactions and stuff. I know you have some differing thoughts on these characters. How do you feel they took them and translated them into this new world, this new Midgar? Are they better, worse? You know, what are your thoughts?
They have their ups and downs. The thing is, the original game, especially toward this part of the game, there wasn't a whole lot going on with a couple of the characters, right? Cloud doesn't talk much at all. Aerith doesn't even talk a whole lot in the original, certainly more than Cloud. Barrett is just a lot of cussing at Biggs and Wedge and Jesse.
A lot of censored cussing, which is important.
Yeah. They had their work cut out for them because of how little they had to work with. And I think they do a good job for the most part. There are times where I felt like Aerith and Tifa didn't even want to be there. Cloud too, but it almost kind of works for Cloud because I'm not sure he did.
I think that's almost the point for Cloud.
Yeah. It's certainly not always, right? And I think toward the end of the game, I was much more impressed with a lot of the voice acting. Like a lot of Aerith's scenes at the end, I felt were so much better done than part of the stuff at the beginning. Tifa, like I love what they try to do with Tifa, but her, and maybe this is kind of how she was in the original, just very mild-mannered, and that was kind of her whole point, was like, oh, there's this really mild-mannered looking, almost like teenage girl, but she'll just kick your ass. That doesn't come through super well in this one, I don't think. Barrett is the only one that I thought, like, every time he opened his mouth, I was like, hell yeah, like, that's Barrett. Of the main four, that is. I love the Avalanche characters. I thought Jesse and Biggs were phenomenal. I thought all of the Shinra characters were phenomenal. Sad to say, Sephiroth, like, I was just, like, completely disinterested every time he was on the screen. But I think with how little they had to work with, what a lot of these characters were in the original, they did a great job trying to bring more to them.
I can definitely agree with that. I think something that stood out for me a lot were the character interactions. I felt a lot of the dynamics between the characters were really fun to see. I don't know if it's just me or if it's just the original game not having enough time, but I found a lot of times I didn't really get a good sense of the dynamics between a lot of these characters. And maybe it could be because it wasn't voice acted and it's harder to like convey emotion via text or what it is. But in this game, I felt like there was a lot more dynamic between everybody. Tifa and Cloud and Aerith having their little love triangle thing was really pronounced in this game. And it was definitely hinted at in the first one. But in this one, it's like really kind of in your face, but it never feels too heavy-handed to me. There's a couple scenes where it's like obviously they're really leaning into it, but it's cute and funny, not like, oh my god, again. And I felt that way a lot of times, whether it was Cloud and Aerith talking and Aerith trying to get Cloud to lighten up, or Barrett and Tifa talking about the drama of being eco-terrorist, or Cloud and Tifa reminiscing about their childhood. I thought a lot of these dynamics came across really well. And even like Cloud and Barrett kind of bickering constantly for most of the game because they don't really see eye to eye. Cloud's about the money, Barrett's trying to save the planet. And I thought all of these interactions came across really good. And a lot of the little moments with the characters really stood out to me. There's one in particular that I keep going back to when Aerith is climbing that ladder in the Sector 5 slums, and the ladder breaks and she has to like jump up to grab the thing on top, and she just lets out that little like shit. Like I thought that was really funny because I did not expect that from Aerith. And I thought it worked really well though, because this is a world where she would probably say that. Like she's not a character that's just like this pure image that I think we have of her, and I thought that was a nice little way to show that. And she's a lot more like sarcastic and funny than I expected. I laughed a lot in this game. Like I thought there was a lot of really funny, quippy little lines that I found a lot of humor out of.
Here's another big point of disagreement. I think I smirked twice. I definitely did not find myself laughing a lot in this game. There are some great moments though. I'm thinking in particular. So it's kind of after the section I described as long and boring. You get Tifa back. So it's basically right after you do the Corneo Mansion thing, and you have this like this several hours of you like trotting through the sewers with Tifa and Aerith, and that was great. I think having all three characters there, one, like obviously it helped the combat and the mechanics a lot, just having all three party members, but then there was a lot of cool interactions between them. There was definitely, this would be one of the times I smirked for sure, was when Aerith like grabs Cloud by the arm and Tifa's immediately like, and like grabs his other arm. I think this is in the train graveyard.
Yes.
There's some really funny, okay, I just said I didn't laugh. There's some really comical moments going on there with them that do kind of bring a smile to your face where you're like, this is kind of a little bit of levity before this game is about to get a little darker. And I think once this game gets dark is when I personally think it hits its stride. But I certainly understand them wanting to have some lighter moments because, man, the back half of this game is like, it starts to get a lot heavier.
I can definitely agree with that. And I think they hit those heavy beats really well, too. Like, I'm not trying to say that the whole game is hilarious because it's not. Like, there's the end, like you said, is a very heavy, very, like, hard-hitting thing, and it works really well, I think.
There's some great moments in this game from a serious perspective, I think, and it's obviously it's a matter of opinion. I think, something I wanted to bring up was that what I had started to think of this game as is almost like a stage play, because I don't watch a lot of, I guess what you would just call like anime or like anime influenced media, where there are a lot of these like really exaggerated like physical gestures and people literally like almost like looking toward the camera, the audience when they talk, or just these characters that they really are their own entity. They're not trying to, I think, be relatable to the audience half the time. I mean, you may disagree with that, but that's kind of how I end up seeing a lot of this. And once I realized like, oh man, this is kind of like watching a play as opposed to watching a movie, it started to make more sense, and I kind of appreciated some of the more campy moments throughout the story.
I can definitely understand that and agree to it to an extent. I don't know if I would say I don't find the characters relatable so much, but I understand like they're not all super complex and have a bunch of flaws and are like dealing with like psychological trauma and things. I mean, I guess Cloud kind of is, but yeah. I definitely understand where like some of them are just more surface level, but I think what works is just the way they're written to kind of be. It's mostly the character dynamics that I think is strong amongst them. Like if you would take any of these characters in a vacuum, I can definitely kind of understand where you're coming from, and I totally get where you're talking about the stage play elements, especially when you look at something like the Honeybee Inn sequences, which I know you don't like.
That's like straight out of Chicago. Yeah, I mean that's a play.
Yeah, it feels it's super exaggerated. It's a big production. Cloud's dancing and like breaking out dance moves, and it's a bit of a like pace breaker and stuff. But again, it's about that levity before the dramatic parts, and I think it was the only way they could have taken that stuff that happened in the first game that's kind of silly and goofy, like Cloud being put in a dress, and they just really went all the way with it. Because that's silly and goofy. It's a goofy concept for the way this game portrays it. So I think the only way they could have done it was to really go all in on it. And I personally really liked the way they did that.
I will say some of my disdain toward it kind of eased up toward the end because I realized, like, yeah, okay, the back half of this game being what it is, I get why they tried to have so many of those moments in the first half because there's really no place for them in the back half.
Right. I think one of the big things that we haven't talked about yet, and kind of the big story thing that I want to touch on before we move on to combat, is, of course, the Whispers, or the plot ghost, if you will, as Maximilian Dude calls them. They're these little ghosts that have appeared throughout the game in various places that were never in the first game. And they're always kind of a mystery. I know you kind of hated those plot ghosts, am I right?
Initially, yeah. I mean, and at the end, still kind of, yeah. But I think they just seemed so stupid and pointless for most of the game. And obviously, part of that is because you simply don't understand what they are yet. And I don't know. maybe they should have reconsidered how they, or maybe how long they waited to reveal what they are. Because when you and I were talking about it after I finished it, you were like, oh yeah, and the ghosts show up here because of this, and the ghosts show up here because of that. And it's almost like, yeah, all right, that kind of makes sense. I mean,
I get that.
It's still anime as hell, but I get it. And but in the moment, it was just like, what are these things? They're so dumb. They're so dumb. And literally, like, I think my favorite part of it was when, spoilers, I guess, Jessie is on her deathbed, and there's a ghost hovering around her, and Tifa literally goes up and like waves her hand in front of her face like someone farted, because it's just there, and it has nothing, no real presence. I mean, it's there enough for her to acknowledge, but not to do anything. And so I was just like, these are so stupid. But I will say, once you kind of figure out what they are, and some of the conversations you and I had afterwards, they went in my head from like a completely needless, stupid thing in the game to, okay, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt to see where this goes.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about some of those spoilers at the tail end of this. We'll kind of go into a little bit of a speculation section where we talk about the very ending, and it's been a very divisive thing amongst the community and the fandom of how those ghosts work and how the end of the game plays out. And I think we'll definitely talk about that towards the end of this. I don't want to go into any spoilers here, but there's a lot going on with those ghosts that I think you're right, you don't see at face value, and it all depends on how much you're invested in the mystery of them throughout the game. If you don't really care about them and you're not really curious to see where that mystery goes, then yeah, they just get in your way the whole time. Like, it's just like they feel like they come out of nowhere and they're adding nothing to the plot. And it isn't until the end, I feel like, you can't really appreciate them at all. And I think it does kind of make the rest of the game, when they show up, kind of annoying. Like, I can agree with you, where it's like, why are you here? Like, why do you keep getting in my way? And what are you adding to this plot right now?
That's ultimately the thing, is if they were doing things and I didn't know why, it could have been more intriguing, but it didn't even feel like they were doing anything. They were just there. Really, until the end. I can definitely think of a couple things toward the end that they do. But up to that point, it was like, you just show up and like things happen anyway. And I don't know why you're there.
I think that's kind of on purpose, again, and we'll kind of talk about that. But it does feel weird for most of the game, since you don't know what they're doing and you don't know anything about them.
Yeah. And related to that, I wanted to talk about Sephiroth a little bit, because so much of what makes him great in the first game is something that, frankly, like, they couldn't repeat in this one, because he's just two steps ahead of you in total mystery for so long. Like, I think the first glimpse you get of him is like his sword stuck in Shinra President's back in the original game, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually you come across this giant snake that he impaled on a spike. And so there's just all this tension and build up, and then finally there's this big reveal. They couldn't really do that in this one because you know everything. You know Sephiroth now, right?
Right, like, so 99% of the world knows who this character is and what he's about.
Yeah, so they're trying to tease him with Cloud's visions here and there, and like, I don't know. It's just every time he showed up, it was just like, yeah, okay, like cryptic words, and Cloud gets a headache, and then this happens 6 or 7 more times before I think you actually finally encounter him for the first time. And then I thought the whole thing in the HQ with him carrying Genova out like he did in the first one was totally on point. There is a weird, I don't know if this is too spoilery for this section, where it kind of flashes to a guy in like a cloak that's carrying Genova instead of Sephiroth. And I was just like,
yes, yeah.
God damn it. Like, is this game going to explain anything that's going on? But I guess it just didn't really land with me, but I get it, because I'm glad. Every complaint I have is like, I'm glad they tried, because I think I would have been more disappointed for them to just completely retread something I already knew.
Right. It was, for a lot of this game, that's kind of where you have to look at it, because it's like, if you just do the same thing, does that have the same sort of impact in 2020? Like, right. Especially with a game like Final Fantasy VII, because so much of it is mystery based. The whole story behind Cloud, the whole story behind Sephiroth, what is Aerith and what is the Cetra, like all of this stuff. There's so many little mysteries that are built up through the whole game that you know all the answers to now, or at least the majority of people playing this game know the answers to. So they almost had to do something, and I think that's like why the Whispers are in the game, is because they needed a new mystery. They needed something to keep you kind of wondering what was going on, because they couldn't do that with Sephiroth. They couldn't do that with Cloud. Like, you know all that stuff, and they kind of tease these little hints in there, and you know all these things now. So I think that's why they're there, and I can agree with you that not everything with Sephiroth lands. I think Sephiroth to me, and maybe this is a problem in and of itself, but he was just kind of a non-factor to me. Like, I wasn't like necessarily disappointed with anything, but I was like, oh look, Sephiroth showed up again. That's cool, I guess. And then just kind of moved on. Like, it wasn't until the very end that anything with Sephiroth really landed for me. And I think at the end I was kind of like, okay, I'm interested to see where they're going and what they're doing with Sephiroth, but nothing before that was ever really like, oh no, Sephiroth's here.
To me, that's the most jarring part, is I just never felt like he was much of anything. And then there's a line toward the end where Aerith is like, Shinra doesn't matter as much as this guy who's going to, like, destroy the whole planet. And I was like, really? Are you sure? Because up to this point, like, this game has given me no real indication of that. Why does he have feathers? There was so much about it. I just was, like, rolling my eyes constantly and waiting for him to be off the screen. Which is sad, because he's, like, kind of this iconic, badass villain, but I was also 14 when I thought he was cool, so I don't know if that's a factor in it as well.
Right. Does that stand up? Like, does 30-year-old Adam think that Sephiroth is still cool? Apparently the answer is no.
Yeah, and I was going to say, just along the lines of the villains, though, and I don't know if we want to save most of the story stuff toward the end and kind of get into some of the mechanics, but one of the last things I wanted to say right now was the Shinra villains are freaking awesome. Like,
they are.
They're all there from the original game, and I thought the original actually gave a lot of them pretty good personality. They have a lot of screen time, a lot of really funny moments, a lot of interactions with the characters, but they just took it to the next level here. And I, like, every time Reno was on screen, I was like, dude, it's Reno. Like, that is how I imagined Reno. Like, he's perfect.
Definitely.
Loved Scarlet, loved Heidegger, and some of them didn't even have that many lines, but it was still just like, no, that is how they were in my head. I think they hit the villain cast so well in this.
I definitely agree. Everybody felt like they had their own tropes, but not in a bad way. Like, it was tropes in a good way. Everybody had their own little things. You know, Heidegger was like the boisterous, like, you know, boasting villain all the time, where he's like, you know, look at what I'm going to do. I'm going to crush Avalanche. Hojo was just the crazy, like, sadistic, creepy doctor guy that, again, you feel like this is the Hojo that you remember from Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
You know, that one
possibly
moment,
creepier,
I don't want
to...
yeah, almost definitely creepier. And I don't want to get too much into it, but, like, some of the stuff that he does with Aerith and, like, says regarding Aerith is like, dude, what is wrong with you? Yeah. like, why are you so messed up? And honestly, it makes me really excited to see, since so many of these villains shined in the later parts of FF7. Especially, like, you know, Scarlet and Reeve and, you know, Palmer. All these guys are bigger at the end of the game than they are at the beginning. I'm very interested to see what they do with those characters and how they kind of embellish them even more and what their interactions with our cast are going to be like.
It'll definitely be interesting to see how they do the second part of this game in more ways than one, right?
Yeah, and I think with that in mind, we should probably talk about maybe the best part of this game. I bragged about the story the whole time, but this game's combat is insane. It is one of the best combat systems I've ever experienced. And I know you were complimenting it basically the whole way through. So just let it go, Adam. Tell us about this game's combat.
You're not exaggerating. It is, and look, there's different styles of combat for different people. I get that. As far as, like, a story-based RPG, this is it. This is the pinnacle of what the last 40 years have been about, man.
We've never seen something as good as this.
This is what we've been working towards. So, to someone who's never played it, I'll try to describe it in the most basic way, right? You end up in this situation where, you know, a encounter starts, and you're moving your character around in real time. You'll press circle to dodge, like R bumper to block, and square to attack, right? But then, when you hit X, you bring up a little command menu similar to the originals, and at that point, time goes very, very slow, so you can issue these commands. And your ATB gauge will fill up slowly over time, but fills up much faster when you attack. So the idea is to kind of jump between the different characters, build up their ATB, use a command, and then come back. And then, of course, there's tons of kind of supplemental materia to where you can do different things with that. But at a base level, it's like managing in real time with some pausing to get the most effective like combinations of abilities off. That would almost be enough in itself, but man, we haven't even gotten started because they allow you so much goddamn customization to how you pull these, how you do what I just described, that it's incredible. Because first off, every character has something like 6-7 weapons in the game, and each of them have their own sort of skill tree that you put points into to get everything from here's plus 10 more attack to here's like plus 5 more defense when your health is below 25%. I mean, there's a huge range of things going on there. And with that is also each weapon has materia slots, and that's really where you get your active spells and some passive benefits. So you have essentially three things going on here. You have the weapon skills, which are all these passive things that you've put points into. You have the weapon abilities, which are active abilities tied to each weapon that you can permanently learn for your character over time. And then you have the materia, which is a mixture of active and passive effects. And those three things combined allow you to build every character in this game as straightforward as you want, as hybridized as you want, as specialized as you want, as just wacky, I can't believe that worked as you want. Dude, I don't want to rant too hard. I want you to say some stuff, but man, I could go on all day about how fucking good this is.
No, I totally understand. One of the things that is so good about this is while you can build every character in a different way, every character kind of has their own play styles that are very specific to them. You know, Cloud, everybody has a triangle skill that is specific to them. And it's a special ability that typically builds ATB faster and has like very specific purposes. For Cloud, you can switch into like this Punisher mode where you move really slow, but you just wreck shit. Like you do so much damage with this Punisher mode. And Barrett has this like overcharged like big shot that fills up your ATB almost instantly. And Tifa has her like different, I forget what they're called exactly, but these different moves that will build stagger really hard. And did you mention stagger?
No, I didn't, which is a shame on me because that's a huge part of it too.
Is a super big part of this game. Is kind of it's a system that they've taken almost directly from Final Fantasy 13, a game that I think a lot of people, myself included, are not the biggest fans of.
Right.
But that stagger mechanic is such a great one, and that you build up this meter by doing different doing different attack combinations and doing different things that will build it faster. And when you hit this stagger point, your damage goes up to like 160% to start, and you do that much more damage to this enemy, and they're frozen in place kind of, and they're just like downed, and they're just sitting there, and you can just unleash into them. And it's so satisfying to hit this stagger and just pull off these crazy combos. And everybody can be built for different reasons, but everybody kind of has their thing that they're best at, and all have their own special abilities. And I think that part of it for me was the part that stood out the most, is how every character plays so uniquely. And I wanted to switch to everybody. I wanted to play as Tifa. I wanted to play as Cloud. I wanted to play as Barrett. I wanted to play as Aerith. Like, I wanted to see how everybody played and really learn their movesets and how to best utilize them as a character. And I thought that was really cool because I didn't know if they'd be able to do that.
Yeah, so when you think about the original combat, the main difference between characters was two things. There was your limit breaks, and there was like how effective your regular attack was. That about is the end of it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Some characters,
materia affected everything else. Like that was really where all your customization came in.
And some of the base stats were different, so like it made more sense to have Barrett as a frontline combatant and Aerith in the back because of their like HP. But for the most part, yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of difference in how you assigned these things. Well, in this game, because of the abilities that tie into stuff, I think that changes. You know, with Aerith, yeah, okay, you could try to buff up her regular attack, I guess, if that's what you were going for. But ultimately, she has these wards she can cast that allow her to like be in an entrenched defensive position and double cast any offensive spell, right? And yeah, other characters can take advantage of it, but she's already there. So to me, I just kind of kept her there.
Right.
And so she is obviously a mage. Her weapons, while she does have, because all the different weapons specialize in different parts, so she does have more attack-oriented and defense-oriented ones. But she, far and away, gets the weapons that give you the most magic ability. But what I really wanted to talk about regards to this, I think a testament to how good it is and how versatile it is you and I both found the game pretty challenging, and we built our parties like completely differently, right?
Oh, completely differently.
Yeah, so how did you tend to build your characters?
I almost hybridized everybody to a degree. I very much like focused on magic. I always wanted every element that I could have in there somewhere, sometimes twice. I wanted, Barrett to be loaded up with ice and thunder materia, and Cloud would have fire, and Tifa would have, arrow and cure. But like, I always wanted to diversify as much as I could to make sure I had every ground covered. I was always about targeting weaknesses of enemies and, building that stagger gauge and trying to knock them down using those weaknesses. And I focused very heavily on that. And I would often just kind of find a weapon that had the best stats for what I wanted that character to be, and just laser in on that weapon and use it for most of the game. And that was kind of my go-to strategy, was kind of diversify everybody to a degree and have everybody be kind of a hybrid character. But I know you did something completely different.
Yeah, so I looked at what each weapon did and took that as an invitation to try to build the character how that weapon wants you to. And I just changed weapons a lot and respect a lot and swapped material around a lot. But I would get to a point where I found one that I really liked with the character. And so, for instance, I don't think I ever put a single piece of materia on Tifa that was a spell. I think haste might have been the only one, because I don't think magic affects how much haste does. So it was just a matter of her ATB fills up fast already because she has the most speed. I can get haste cast on everyone. But it was, for me, it was all like HP up, luck up, deadly dodge, parry, steadfast block. It was like, you're gonna get in there, you're gonna punch things, and you're gonna fuck things up physically, because Cloud is gonna be over here with a couple different elements and maybe a cure, and Barrett's gonna be over here with a lot of support materia, hardly any offense for me. All his offense is gonna come from his weapons, and it was like, with 3 people, that worked amazingly well, because you could have one person doing everything you needed. Because of the way I played, I hated when I only had 2 party members. Because ultimately, what I loved about this combat was the amount of different things you could do with it. And just as a matter of math, the more party members you have, the more you can do with it. So,
of course.
So it was just, every time I was with 2 people, I was like, fine, I guess I'll build these guys like balanced because I have to, but I'm not happy about it.
I definitely agree that the game shines the brightest in those 3 party member scenarios. Whenever you have this, it's essentially a huge canvas that you have to paint on. Like, you can take these characters and manipulate them however you want. And it was always fascinating by the end of the game, I was always swapping materia. Like, I didn't do a lot of respecking. I hardly did any respecking, honestly. I built my weapons the way that I thought they should be. And I was like, all right, that's good enough for me. But as far as like materia goes, I was swapping that out almost every battle, like even just little battles. I was like, okay, this situation fits better for Cloud to have a fire sword, so I'm going to put elemental materia on fire and give it to Cloud. And like Barrett, he's been doing a lot of damage to these flying enemies, which are all weak to thunder, so I'm going to throw elemental materia with thunder on Barrett. And I would be swapping my materia around all the time at that end game.
I almost don't know if they wanted you to respect the more I think about it, and the reason I say this is because the math doesn't add up on these abilities that you unlock, or the skill trees rather. If you look at like how much attack you get from a 4 SP node, an 8 SP node, and a 12 SP node, the 4 and the 8 together was like always more efficient than the 12, like in every instance that I looked at. So it almost became a matter of like, they were sort of saying, as you get further in the game, you're going to have to invest more SP for the same return. This is a problem when you respec things, because it wasn't obvious to me at first, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go to the top first and start unlocking these big ones. But once I actually did some of the math, I was like, wait a minute, I don't know that it ever makes sense to get anything at the higher end of a weapon before you get the same thing at the lower. Sometimes it would make sense from the standpoint of the higher level ones had new materia slots, like fair enough, you got to get those.
Right. Or like sometimes they have like specific interesting buffs, like if you're below 25% or whatever,
Yeah.
you could do this much more damage or get ATB faster or whatever. Like, there were some specifics that it may make sense, but I get what you're saying, where it's like those numbers don't always add up as far as plus attack and plus defense and whatever would go.
Yeah, it almost seems like, okay, you're basically supposed to save these like 16-point SP attack power things for when you've got nothing left to buy. And that isn't super obvious until you've respect 20 times and screwed yourself over. So,
which is something I never did.
Yeah, because presumably you had to do it in kind of the quote right order because you started small and worked your way up, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think something to, while we're kind of talking about all of the different customization options, the game doesn't always work in your favor in those regards, especially with things like materia swapping. Like I was saying at the end of the game, I'd be swapping all the time. I'd be spending more time in menus sometimes than I would be in battle, just because I was trying to swap all my materia around to make it more effective. I think the game could really benefit from some loadout type situations where you can like set 2 or 3 different materia loadouts for various situations.
You absolutely need loadouts in this game, and I will be shocked if they don't have them in the second. There's a part toward the end of the game where you have all 4 party members, but it splits you into 2 groups of 2, and you kind of have to jump back and forth between it, a kind of almost like a puzzle to unlock different like hallways and pathways so you can navigate this like underground lab. A little bit before that, if you do this kind of Shinra VR thing, you can get an EXP up materia. And I'm thinking to the game like, okay, I just power gamed for like 40 hours. You think I'm not going to swap this EXP out every single time you make me switch parties? Because I'm going to do that.
Right.
You were saying how you kind of had a couple different sets of max materias for your elements, right? Your thunder, your fire, and your ice. I really didn't have that since it was usually only one person using it. So I was really forced to swap a lot of materia every single time it switched parties there for me at the end. Or else they wouldn't have like any of the stuff you kind of needed to balance out a 2-person party. So that was annoying as hell and would have been just easily remedied by some loadout swats. I'd click 2 buttons and it would be done instead of like going just over and over through all these different materias.
Right. And I think the concept there was really cool because the 2 party setups they gave you was really something you hadn't had much in the game. You never really get a Tifa and Aerith combo until that point. And you have Cloud Barret at the beginning, but having them alone is not really something that you get beyond that first fight with the Scorpion, really. So I thought it was really cool to give you those setups and those characters and kind of make you think and do things in a different way.
Yeah.
But man, it was frustrating to have to cycle through all that materia the whole time.
It was such a better idea on paper than in practice, I guess, is really the way to put that. And another thing for me was it's so Square soft to is it Square Enix now, I guess?
It'd be Square Enix now.
It's so Square Enix to say like, I want to evoke a certain emotion in the player right now, or I want to tell a certain story, and just gameplay be damned right now. Like, I don't care how much it messes with it. That's just so them. And this is a really good example of it, this part where you swap off to 2 different parties, because there's no way someone playing that wasn't like, hey, boss, this is kind of annoying as hell. And they're like, yeah, but we need the tension of them being separated. And it's like, okay, fine. And then...
like, sure.
When we talked about a part, just kind of the final fight with Sephiroth, I won't get too detailed, but what this game will do sometimes is when there's a cutscene before a boss fight, you can hit square and pull up the menu, and you'll be able to adjust some things before the fight starts. So they prompt you for this with Sephiroth, but only for Cloud. I mean, I guess you could change other people's, but you're not thinking in your head you need to, because at that moment, like in your party menu, it's Cloud. It's just Cloud. So I swap all these things around, and then like 10 minutes into the fight, like the rest of your party joins you, and I'm like, oh, well, great. I took off like half of her materia and half of her materia. So the way that I had built those characters up to this point, they didn't have like very vital components of that. That was really frustrating. But I think at the end of the day, I was just like, yeah, it's Squaresoft. Like this is what they do.
this is their kind of MO. Yeah. I think one of the things that we've talked about a lot, and it kind of goes into the like minor gripes that I have with the game, is the fact that ATB on non-active characters charges pretty slow. Like, I didn't find it to be offensively slow most of the game, but overall it is slow. And I think that could be remedied a lot with just having some sort of gambit system like FF12. Like, this game is so inspired by so many Final Fantasy games when it comes to, like, Stagger being directly from 13, and, like, some of the design of the world being very reminiscent of Final Fantasy X, and, you know, they take elements from all these really good Final Fantasy games. I cannot fathom why they didn't take some sort of cue from the gambit system from 12, because you have almost no direct control over your party unless you are literally actively participating with that character. And so half the time they'll just sit there and block or just do like one or two really slow attacks, and their ATB is going nowhere.
They throw in a couple of like materias to try to give you options, and I just didn't feel that they were really any good. Like, for instance, there's one called Synergy, where if you take a character and hook fire up to Synergy, then it's like anytime you cast a spell or you cast fire, maybe, I forget exactly what it is, but it's like anytime you issue an attack command, they will then use that. And that's kind of cool, but they still need the ATB. So half the time it doesn't do anything. And like, it's, I feel like their attempts, they were probably thinking in their heads, we don't need the gambits because we have X, Y, and Z materia. It's just not a substitute for gambits. It's just not. And maybe you don't need the exact same level from the gambits because ultimately you do want to switch. But I need the ability to have my characters do something besides stand there and block when I'm not controlling them. Because that's all they did.
I definitely agree. The only one of those materia that I ever found useful was like auto cure. Yeah. Because that one was super helpful. Like, if I just throw auto cure on whoever had the highest cure level, and that was very useful for me. But those other ones, like you said, I just never really found a point to them. I never really found like they had enough going for them to make me want to use them.
And I'm sure on YouTube right now is a video of someone just coming up with this baller build involving all those materia. You know,
of course,
someone's figured it out. But I don't think it's obvious to a casual player.
It's just like the Scorpion fight in the demo. Like, when the demo had come out, you know, everyone was like, man, the Scorpion fight's kind of hard, and like, it's a really intense fight, and it takes like 15 minutes. And then you'd go and watch like speedrun YouTube videos of people doing it in like 3 minutes. And it's like, how? like,
that was me the second time.
How did you even do that? Well, exactly. But like, it was like you had kind of figured it out.
There's a lot of parts in this game that aren't obvious at first, and one of those is that like you have to use certain abilities to interrupt enemy attacks, or else you're going to be healing a lot. And on top of that, your attacks can be interrupted a lot too, which was frustrating as hell at times, but I think also added a lot to the challenge, because if I could just instantly use a Curaga when I needed it, I don't think I would have died once in this entire game. Whereas there were times I only died because I had a heal coming, and then Barrett got blown up across the room, and everyone else died. And it was like, okay, fair enough, I gotta watch those attacks.
Right, you really had to play strategically. There's a lot of strategy and like thought that is put into this combat system, particularly in the bosses, which we haven't really touched on, but pretty much every boss fight in this game is
amazing.
Like the boss fights in this game are phenomenal. Even down to like, I think I fought like 5 different giant robots.
So many robots.
And every single one of them was a fun and interesting fight in its own right. Like, it was fascinating to me that I could fight so many of the same thing and still feel like everyone was unique and fun to fight. And it's just a testament to this game's combat system and the way you have to think through strategies. And enemies always have different patterns and different things they can do that you have to learn on the fly. And it's just so much fun to figure it out.
There's a fight toward the end. I think you have Aerith, Barrett, and then there's like Red 13 is kind of as a guest. And it's this robot, right? And he kind of charges at you, and you have to like hide behind these pillars and stuff. So there's an attack he does where it brings this huge lightning column down. And if you have him charge into it, it staggers him, or I think it pressures him rather. I discovered that totally by accident, and it made me realize like, oh my god, did like way more boss encounters have things like this? I never figured it out.
Yeah, I never noticed that. That's insane.
Yeah, so that was something that just in the moment I was like, not only was that totally badass what I just did, I now wonder if there's way more opportunities in the game to do things like that I just never noticed. And there might not be. It could be a pretty limited thing, but it was just like, I'm seriously in the final hour and a half of the game, and I'm still figuring out new cool shit. Like,
Right.
It was
and
awesome.
there's so much of the game where it's like, and they put you in so many different boss fight scenarios, and not necessarily every one is like the scenario you want to be in. Like Hell House, for example, is a pretty talked about boss in this remake at this point, and it comes in this like arena scenario in Walmart. You have to fight this giant house that has like mechanical arms and like wants to murder you, and it's called Hell House, for God's sake.
Yeah.
But the fight itself has some issues because you're like with just Cloud and Aerith, and if you haven't really figured out how to make those two characters work yet, it can be a frustrating fight, and you have to have all of your elemental materia or that fight's going to be a pain in the ass.
Yeah, I had one, and it wasn't particularly difficult. It just took me 25 minutes, right? Like it was such a grind because of that. So I have a question that's somewhat off topic. Why is arrow a thing in Final Fantasy? When did they add that? Why did they add that? And can they get rid of it, please? Like, it's one too many.
Arrow is an element that I'm most familiar with from Kingdom Hearts. So it could be a Kingdom Hearts edition, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I don't know when arrow became a thing, but I'm most familiar with arrow from Kingdom Hearts.
I feel like it's just one too many. And in a fight like that, you didn't need one extra.
Yeah, and honestly, there weren't a lot of enemies that were weak to arrow, and there wasn't a ton of uses for it throughout the game.
There was a few flyers it would bring down, but I would either just jump up and attack them because you can do that, or like Barret them to death. So
right, or hit them with their actual elemental weakness. Like a lot of times, arrow wasn't their weakness; it would just bring them down. Like I know for the chariot boss, like his actual weakness was Blizzard, but arrow would bring him down. So I just hit him with Blizzard until he fell. Like it didn't really feel like something that I needed to use. I definitely agree. Arrow felt like an afterthought for most of the game for me as well.
There's that one intel that's like master all these active materia. I think that was the only one I didn't because I just never used it. I think it was at 0.
Yeah, that sounds. Yeah, no, I never did that one. I never did the Leviathan fight. Like there was a couple things that I didn't ever finish, but overall, though, this game's combat system is just such a joy to experiment with and play around with. And there's definitely some stuff in the next game that I hope they do, like loadouts and gambits to some degree to help build upon the base that they have.
Yeah.
But it's such a strong foundation. It is one of the best combat systems I've ever played.
It really is. I was telling you, one of my favorite games ever, the thing I just praise endlessly, is Mass Effect 3. And I haven't had as much fun building a party and then executing what I want to in combat since that game. And that is extremely high praise from me. Because to me, there's never been a game I've ever played like Mass Effect 3 where I could do something like that. And I think this beats it, honestly. Just the ability to do exactly what you want in that regard and then go execute it. Very different combat systems, right? One's kind of a shooter, but just the ability to say, here's what I want you to do, here's what I want you to do, now let's go do it and see how it works. And if it doesn't, tweak some things here and there. Just amazing, unparalleled.
Yeah, they gave you so many options all the time, and it's such a deep system with so many, and deep, such like a buzzword, but really, how many hours do you think you spent in menus in this game, Adam?
So my playtime was like 5 more hours than you, and while some of that is certainly me like walking away from my TV a lot, I gotta figure at least 2 extra hours of fiddling around in menus. Literally
just sitting in menus. And that's just a testament to the level of customization and depth that this game gives you.
One thing I really hope they expand on in the next one. So you can give Barret these melee weapons toward the end, and it completely changes how he's played. His triangle is an entirely different technique. His attacks are much different than Cloud and Tifa's, which are like really, really fast, and there's like 6 or 7 in the combo. All of Barret's combos are 3 attacks. It's a slow attack, and then a really slow attack that does a ton of damage in a huge area around him. And it's just fantastic for some of those groups of smaller enemies. Sometimes it would interrupt attacks. It just made him play completely differently. And I really hope that even though it isn't really matching up with the old game, that they do a lot more with that in the future. Because Aerith gets a double-bladed sword that's still just a magic staff.
Yes.
And I was like, how cool would that have been for her to have And she's like, she could be a really high damage attacker, but she's really fragile. So she still doesn't feel like Cloud or Barret because they can take a lot of damage. But with her, it's like you gotta use your defensive wards in the right place, and you gotta use your little Fey familiar guy to help you double up those attacks. And there's so much they can do with like alternative weapon styles, and just having so much fun with Barret's like his triangle button becomes this like bull rush where he just charges an enemy, like pushes it away, and then like slams the ground afterwards. And it just completely changes how I was playing the game, that I really hope that some of the weapons in the next one kind of do a similar thing for other characters.
I definitely agree with that. It could make for some really interesting and unique scenarios that would have never happened in the first game because, like, they gave you different weapons, but it was never, like, changing any type of gameplay element. It was just your stats. In this game, different weapons will literally affect the way you play, especially when you look at something like Barret's melee weapons. And I don't know what they would necessarily do for like Cloud, like would they give him like a ranged sword or something, like a magic sword or something? Like I don't know necessarily what those answers are, but Gunblade, I definitely agree that they could do some really cool stuff with that. And I think this is kind of what I want to get into some of that speculation because we've been kind of going on for a while here. I think we should kind of look at the future of this because there is at least one more part to this game, probably 2, maybe even 3. Like we don't know how much they're going to drag this out. I would estimate 3 parts though, and so this next part, what are some of the things, at least from a gameplay perspective, that you kind of want to see going forward?
Yeah. So one thing I really hope's in the second one is, and this is something that the more recent Final Fantasies have moved away from, is the overworld map. I loved the overworld map as a kid, all the early Final Fantasy games. And one of my favorite parts of it was there was this kind of almost like Metroid progression going on with your vehicles. So you'd start with a little land vehicle that could get you maybe through like a desert that you couldn't get over before, but you can't get across this river. And then you get a boat that lets you go down the river, but you can't get over these mountains. So then you get a chocobo, but you can't get over the high mountains. So then you get an airship, and it was this cool progression. It allows the world to feel a little bigger than it actually is, like in a good way. It gives so much freedom to the player, while because of the progression of those systems, you can still keep them confined to where you need to. I always thought it just worked brilliantly. And I know you'll get an airship of some sort simply because it's so tied into Cid's character, but I don't want it to be like FF10 where it's just like a fast travel station. Where it's like a menu that you can select stuff. Yeah.
I definitely agree. And I think an overworld is something that we almost have to see. It's so integral to Final Fantasy VII after Midgar. Like, I think that was such a big thing in the first game where it was like Midgar was such a tight and confined space. And as soon as you left, this whole world was open to you and you didn't know where to go at first. And it was just like, it was almost overwhelming, but in a good way. It harkened back to the days of Final Fantasy IV, Final Fantasy VI, where it was like, this is now my, just my arena. I can go wherever I want. I can do whatever I want. It's a playground for me to explore and find new things. I think we almost have to see a open world in this next game.
I will almost certainly buy this game, the second part, when it comes out no matter what, but I'll be quite disappointed if the most open this game gets is like something similar to the end of this one with like the Chocobo fast travel. Like I'm really hoping they have big plans for, even if they don't have every single thing in there, like maybe I don't need to raise a gold Chocobo to go get Knights of the Round. Fine. I don't even want to do that, to be honest.
Right. Especially with the way summons are implemented in this game. Like, is that really even that important?
Yeah, no. Like, I mean, it might be the only one I'd like, but it's...
Fair enough.
But there was just something so cool about being able to go where you wanted to go. And there were certain places where you didn't even have to visit, but you could because you had the airship. And to me, that is what makes a Final Fantasy game. It hasn't been that way since 10-ish, but like a huge world where there's places that like, yeah, if you go, there's something there waiting for you. But if you don't want to, don't. And
it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I want that player agency back.
And I think you'll get it. I think that's something that's really crucial to the just almost the like dramatic shift in tone that Final Fantasy VII has between Midgar and the rest of the game. Yeah, I think that open world is almost crucial to that, and I think you will definitely see that. something that I'm really interested in is how they're going to implement future party members into this game.
Yeah.
Because we know there's, Kate Sith, Vincent, Yuffie, Sid. I think of the remaining 4.
Yeah, there's only 8 total. I guess that's right.
I think there's only 8 total. And I mean, 2 of those are technically optional. You don't even have to have Yuffie or Vincent throughout the game. I'm pretty sure you never have
there's Red as well, right? Did we count Red?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I can't believe I forgot about Red. Red is in there.
So there's 9. Okay.
I'm very interested to see how those characters are implemented into the next version of this game. Are we going to stick with I think you can't do this combat system with more than 3 people. I think that would be overwhelming, and you would have too much to manage at a given time if you had more than 3 characters at a time in battle.
I do hope there will be sections where one of them tags along as a guest, maybe, because I kind of liked that with Red. But you obviously couldn't do something like, oh, your 3 main or your main, and then you have 5 guests, right? That would be ridiculous.
Of course.
But maybe when you're first recruiting some of these guys, kind of like with Red, they come along as a guest, and you get some spots where it's 4 or 5 people fighting, but you're still only controlling 3.
Right. I wonder if we'll be able to select at a certain point. Like, will you be able to? Because I mean, that's a big thing in most Final Fantasy games, is being able to swap out party members on the fly, like in between battles, and having whoever you want in there, at least in most of the games. And like even Final Fantasy X, you could swap out party members at any given point, even in the middle of battle. Are we going to see something like that?
Yeah.
I'm interested to see how they implement those things, and of course, like how they play and stuff. But I'm more interested in how we're going to get them all together. Are we going to be able to see them all kind of come in and fight at one time in some way? Obviously, you can't have like 9 characters running around killing things. That'd be ridiculous. But I was listening to a different analysis of the game and some speculation stuff, and somebody had suggested almost doing like combo attacks where you can like call in a party member to do some sort of like combo attack with you, and that could be really cool as well. Like have your main party members, but then like call in attacks from your other party members that are on a cooldown or something. That could be neat. I'm interested to see how they implement those things.
Yeah, when you mentioned FF10, that's the first thing that came to mind was like, okay, yeah, not only could you swap out, but they could do some kind of like, it's like Marvel versus Capcom, right, where they come in and do some kind of attack as they're swapping out. Another direction they could go with that is that characters will do various things when they are your backup members, and that could be its own skill tree in itself almost.
Yeah, for sure.
So maybe like when Vincent is one of your backups, everyone gets 10% higher crit, or when like Kate Sith is, they get more HP, or just various things like that. You obviously don't want it to be something crazy that's like, oh, I feel like this character is more useful on the sideline.
Right.
Because that would be a shame, unless it's Kate Sith, in which I would probably be okay with that. But And just along those lines, man, there's a couple characters where in my head I can just see it, right? It's like, dude, I know exactly how Vincent's going to play. I know how they're going to do this and that. It's going to be awesome. And then there's guys like Kate Sith where it's like, yeah, that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, Kate Sith is probably the biggest one that I'm like, how do you even do Kate Sith? Like,
it's going to be weird. I mean, it was weird enough in a turn-based one.
Right. I think the big thing with Kate Sith is like, what is going to make him unique? Like, I could see him playing very similarly to Aerith, like being kind of a mage, like caster in the back, like who just doesn't really get up close and personal with anything. But I don't want him to just be a carbon copy of Aerith. Like, I want him to be unique in his own right, like everybody is in this game currently. So I'm very interested to see how they implement that throughout.
So I don't suspect any of the optional characters will actually be optional in the remake. And part of what makes me think that is they bring up Wutai as such a integral part of the story so far. Like Midgar's at war with Wutai, which I'm sure was a thing in the first one, but they nail it home multiple times here. So there's no way Yuffie isn't going to be forced into your party, which I mean I'm all for, but I'm just saying I don't think any of these are going to be optional this time around.
I definitely agree, and I would also, just from a technical perspective, like the amount of time and effort they're going to have to put into all these characters to make them play, like to make them optional and entire parts of the game people couldn't see with these characters would just be like almost insane to me.
Yeah.
Like, the amount of work they'd have to put into making these characters play for them to just be completely missable would be insane.
I agree with that, and I'm trying to think of any. I think we've pretty much covered all of the gameplay based speculation. Unless there's anything you can think of. My main thing again is like, I want much bigger playstyle changes with weapon swaps. I want something cool to be done with all the extra characters so I can pick from them, and I want an overworld map. Those are kind of my big 3 genie wishes for the second part.
I definitely agree. I think some little things that we kind of already talked about, like loadouts and gambits, would be great.
True.
But I don't know if those are as vital as like some of those big ticket items that we were just talking about. Of like, because those things are kind of like fixes, like little like tweaks. This is like, how do we evolve this system? And I think those. I think you're right. We kind of covered those.
I would like a slightly easier way to navigate materia. There's like a couple different ways to sort it, but frankly, like when you're swapping it out, you're just scrolling through a list of all of the materia you have, and it's not so great.
it's a lot. I think they'll have those little tweaks.
But I guess now it's time to get into what I think you've really been wanting to talk about, and that's kind of the more lore and story based like speculation of what's next and what did that last hour and a half mean, man? Because I still am not quite sure.
Yeah, for me, I think what's so interesting about Final Fantasy VII Remake is it's a game that is trying to recapture the spirit of a game that came out 23 years ago, that everybody has played to death and that everybody knows everything about. And I think in an effort to do that, Square decided to really go off the wall with the end of this game in a lot of ways. I mean, you've described it as very anime, and you're very much correct that this game at the end, you're literally fighting fate. So these whispers are established towards the end of the game, I think around chapter 16, when you find Aerith again and reunite with her and meet Red 13. She explains to you that these whispers are like harbingers of fate, that they're trying to keep fate in line. And what that means to the player essentially is these whispers are trying to make sure the events of the original Final Fantasy VII happen the way they're supposed to. Mm-hmm. That's why they show up when Jesse, like at the beginning around chapter 5, whenever you're going on the second Mako reactor run, these whispers show up and you don't really know why. It's never clear, but what ends up happening is they're there until Jessie trips, falls, and like breaks her ankle or twists her ankle really bad where she can't go on the mission. What that does is it forces Barrett to bring Cloud on the mission, which Cloud has to be on this mission to fall to meet Aerith in the church for things to progress on track. So these whispers are showing up consistently during moments of the game where things are diverging off course. Cloud wasn't supposed to go on that mission in Remake, and the whispers were like, no, you need to be on that mission. And so what Square does is at the end, they have you fight these whispers, and it manifests in this like giant harbinger of destiny thing that looks just like Darkseid from Kingdom Hearts. I was like, man, who threw Kingdom Hearts into my Final Fantasy VII? Like,
the game definitely reached peak anime in that final fight.
It really did. But I think thematically it works really well because it's Square Enix basically saying things will not go according to Final Fantasy VII anymore. Like, this does not have to be set in stone. We aren't going to hit every single beat the same exact way anymore because you have stopped this timeline from happening. You have destroyed fate. And at the same time, that also created another timeline where Zack, a very important character to Final Fantasy VII lore, the character who basically made Cloud into the person that he is, that character is now alive. It's crucial that he dies in the original Final Fantasy VII timeline for Cloud to become the person he is, to think that he's Soldier First Class, to have this
take
kind
his
of
life, right? Like,
yeah, he basically becomes Zack in a way. Like, he has all of his memories. He fights with his Buster Sword. He thinks he is Zack for most of the game, while still thinking he's Cloud. So it's like this like weird mental break that he's having that doesn't get cleared up till the end of the game. And that's very, very crucial to Cloud's character and kind of the progression of the story. And what they're saying now is like, that's going to be different. Like, some of this stuff is going to go differently. Biggs is alive in a timeline. We don't really know which one, whether it's the Zack timeline where he's alive or this current timeline that we've been playing so far where, you know, he's back alive somehow. I mean, you killed Fate. Who knows?
Yeah.
And I think conceptually that's very cool. Of course, it all boils down to what do they do with it in the next game. Like, my entire feelings based on this ending are going to be determined by the next game.
Yeah, and so you and I, like, pretty much, and you were telling me as I was texting you during the final fight, you were like, dude, we have to talk about this, like, as soon as you're finished. So we hopped on a call, and as you were explaining some of that to me, I kind of went from, God, this whole Destiny thing is so lame, to, okay, like, let's see where they're going to do with it. Because once you kind of brought up, like, the symbolism of the old game, and, you know, one of the best examples to me was the Force Ghosts, or Plot Ghosts, literally forcing
you know, whatever.
Wedge out of the Shinra Tower because he originally falls out and dies in the first one.
Yes.
And you were like, yeah, it's like so symbolic. It's them literally like grabbing him, kicking and screaming, pulling him toward what originally happened to him. And it's like, imagine that's the player in that moment almost. And
exactly. It's almost a meta commentary on the people who are very much like, we need a beat by beat remake of Final Fantasy VII. And it's basically Square giving a middle finger to those people. And I can understand why that's got a lot of people upset. Yeah. Like, I can understand why people would be kind of put off by that. But I just think it's such a fascinating, like, idea to say, we can't do a beat by beat remake because that would be boring. Like, we're trying to recapture the spirit of a game that had so many people wondering what's going to happen, what's next. I mean, I wasn't around for these conversations, but I can just imagine, like, going to school and being like, dude, where are you at in Final Fantasy VII? Like, what's going on right now? Like who's doing what? Like, what do you think's going to happen next? And did you see Cloud? Like, figure out all this stuff about his past, like all of these crazy moments. And then, like, you know, Aerith's death, the key big thing from that game, that, you know, none of that has to go according to schedule anymore. They can do some new stuff. And I think a large part of what they're going to do is going to be the same. I think they're going to hit a lot of these same beats. You're still going to go to Calm. You're still going to go to the Gold Saucer. You're still going to go to Nibelheim. Like, you're still going to hit all of these main beats that happen in Final Fantasy VII. I just think there will be, like, new twists. There'll be an alternate timeline to contend with. There'll be new things that are happening around it. And I think a lot of that's going to come from possibly Sephiroth manipulating things. Because it's very much in this game kind of hinted at that Sephiroth knows more than the characters that you're controlling does. Like, it's almost like he's from the future, or at least has future knowledge. Because it feels like he's trying to prevent things from happening the way that they're going. It's almost like he's fighting against fate in a different way that you are. And at the end, it kind of seems like he takes control of the plot ghost whispers to some degree. So I'm very curious to see where they go with that, and if they can make a new mystery around Sephiroth.
I think it did a good job asking some questions too, or at least proposing some things I wouldn't have thought about, because I know so little about Zack from the original one. I mean, he's quite literally like an afterthought in the original one. Like, the designer of the game himself said so. They were like, yeah, we got to put it in toward the end because we thought Cloud's backstory needed more mystery. And it's like, okay, fair enough, because it was kind of like not much to him. But you know, you've explained to me things for how, like, Crisis Core really did a lot with him. And this game clearly intends to do a lot with him. So I'm really intrigued about all that. And I'm kind of glad they teased that at the end. The timeline thing could be really cool. And it's kind of going back to what you said. Like, to me, it would just be like an insult to the original to just remake that as is, because it's kind of saying it's not good enough anymore. It can't hold up on its own. And while, yeah, I don't think I would enjoy the battles a whole lot, I think that game can absolutely hold up today in as far as, like, its world, its story, and its characters. So I love the idea that they're saying that game is its own thing. It's great. It's legendary. What would it be like if Final Fantasy started 30 years later and we made 7 right now. Like that's what they're trying to do, and I love it.
That's an amazing way to put it, because I've heard some people describe this game as a requel. It's almost like a remake sequel, where it's like the events of 7 happened, and we're almost playing like a different reality where we don't want those events to happen anymore. And so it's like, here's a new thing, and here's a new story, and a new way to look at this iconic story, because 7 exists. You can play that game right now on like 30 different systems. Right. like I played it 5 years ago for the first time, and it was great, and it's a fun game, and I'd recommend playing it if you haven't. If you haven't played Final Fantasy 7 and you're listening to this, what are you doing? Go play Final Fantasy 7. But I think it's super cool of them to say, we don't want to do just that anymore. We want to do something new. We want to take our own spin on it. In 20 plus years after it came out, we want to try something new with that story. Like, it almost feels like they're taking a lot of the elements of the expanded universe stuff and implementing them in new ways, and trying to like retcon them to a degree. Like they're just taking all of this lore of Final Fantasy VII and mixing it into one thing, and they're saying like, we're doing something different, but it's still Final Fantasy VII. And I love that idea. And will they execute it? We don't know yet. like Square does not always have the best track record. If you've played Kingdom Hearts, you know what I mean. Like, that story is a complete and total mess, and I'll be the first person to admit it, even though I love it. It's a mess. Can that happen here? Of course. But I'm hoping that with the love and care that they put into this one, there's so many things in FF7 Remake that feel like they really care about Final Fantasy VII. Like, even down to very, very specific things like the Hell House being a big boss fight that was just like a normal little enemy in the first game that people kind of talked about. Like, oh, the Hell House, that's a weird, kooky enemy. That's not going to be in Final Fantasy VII. And then they blew it up into this huge, big boss fight. And, like, there's this little moment in the first chapter where... or it's like the second or third chapter. There's these guards by the gate, and if you talk to them, they're like really goofy guards, and they're like direct references to the 2 guards at the gate in the first game, and they have almost the same dialogue and act very similarly to those 2 guards. Like, there's just so many little touches of like, we care about Final Fantasy VII, and it's hard for me to believe that they're not going to put that same amount of care into the second and third part of this game, or however many parts it might be, whether it's 1, 2, 3, whatever. Dude, it's hard for me to believe they're not going to try and do that same level of attention to detail.
We're gonna be married with kids before this thing's over.
Oh yeah, this thing's never gonna be over. Like, who are we kidding? Like, it'll be like 2050, and we'll be like, where's Final Fantasy VII?
But I think what you're talking about really begs the question, like, hey man, what are they gonna do with Aerith? Because her death is such a like monumental part of the first game, and was just something like so few games had ever tried before. Was like, we're literally going to kill off a main character that you have been playing this game with.
Yeah.
And to me, I think they have to kill her in some capacity, but it'd be interesting to see, one, what the alternate timeline has to do with that, because maybe she isn't dead in 1 or whatever else. And 2, like, what are they going to do to give it, like, because if on some level you still know it's coming, how are they going to still make it have some emotional stakes? Like, are they going to make you just get that much more attached to her? Is she going to be that much more pivotal to some of the plot going on up to that point? I will be surprised if they do not kill her at all, but they're definitely going to give it like a new twist.
I definitely agree with that. I think a big thing that this game could do that's very interesting is Zack in Crisis Core is actually like Aerith's first love. Like, they make a reference to it in this game where she's like sitting on the playground and kind of tells Cloud, it's my first love. He was Soldier First Class too, or whatever. It's almost like she knows at that moment too. Like, when you kind of look back on it, it's like she almost knows that Cloud isn't Soldier First Class, and that is like, because the way she talks is like, how convenient. Like, it's almost like she knows Cloud in that moment is not who he says he is, and he doesn't even know it.
Yeah.
But regardless of that, I think if they find a way to merge those 2 timelines before, like before Aerith dies, then that could be really fascinating for both Cloud and Zack to be present in that moment where Aerith dies, because it's the two people that care most about her and that she cares most about in this, you know, universe up until that point. So it's like that could be really impactful. And I think another thing is that ultimately Aerith is going to have to die, I think. And no matter what they do to try and prevent it, and no matter like what timeline they look at or whatever, no matter what, she dies in all of them. Like it's such a pivotal thing that she has to die to cast Holy to kill Sephiroth and stop Meteor. Like that's such a crucial thing that no matter what they do, she's going to die, and it's just going to hit that much harder.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see what they do, and it's a risky thing because ultimately that can land as flat and as messy as it could just knock it out the park. So yeah, I wish them the best of luck, and it goes back to me saying is many things about the story of this game that just made me roll my eyes. I'm just so damn glad they took some liberties with that, and they're trying some new things, because I don't think at the end of the day I had any desire to play an HD remake of something that came out 23 years ago and was like one of the defining games of my childhood.
Right. Like it's with a lot of HD remakes, there's major need for improvement. And with FF7, I'm not sure that's the case. Like that game holds up on its own and it can still be played today. And yeah, like combat's still kind of, you know, whatever, but it's still a fun game in its own right today. And I don't know if I want to, like you said, I don't know if I want to see that exact same thing brought over. And I think ultimately that's what's so great about Remake is that they obviously love and care about Final Fantasy VII, and they do everything they can to make that the game to be the best possible version of Final Fantasy VII. And, you know, there's moments obviously where it may not have landed for you and it may not land for everybody, but it's obvious that they care.
Yeah.
And I love the effort that they put into making this, and they went way harder than they had to. Like they didn't have to give us a game with the combat system they did. They didn't have to give us a game with the level of like detail and love for the story that it has. They could have gone less and people would have still been satisfied, I think. But what they gave us is just so far beyond what they needed to, in my opinion, that I'm very excited to see what they do next, more so than I ever was for this one. Like I was obviously very excited for this one, but seeing what they've done with it makes me that much more excited for the next.
Yeah, my hype was pretty tempered because my expectations were not what we got here. And I mean that in the best way possible. Like I was shocked how much I ended up loving this by the end of it. And ultimately that's kind of what I wanted to end on is, would I recommend this to people who weren't super into the first one? And I think the answer is yes. Like it is with the caveat, like, hey, if you don't like anime, there's gonna be some moments where you're like, this is dumb. And it is. But like the combat in this game and the progression is just so freaking good. And I think the back half of the game is so well done with its storytelling. And, you know, other than a couple of strange moments with the plot ghosts, it's pretty solid. And I think even someone who's never played the first game and knows nothing about Final Fantasy could find themselves enjoying this. And if they don't have any expectations going in, I mean, that could really even be a benefit to them. So yeah, man, I loved this game. I'm so glad I bought it. I'm glad you talked me into playing it, because I thought for a minute there I probably just wasn't going to get around to it for a long time because I didn't care that much. Because it's been so long since I've enjoyed JRPGs pretty much. But
yeah,
oh man, this was such a great experience. Like I'm so super happy with this game.
Yeah, I think kind of like you said, for me, my recommendation is like, I think you should play this game, and I think anybody can get a lot out of it. I think if you are a Final Fantasy VII fan, I think a lot of things are going to resonate with you a lot harder. Yeah, and I think it'll be it'll be a better experience if you're really familiar with Final Fantasy VII. But ultimately, the combat in this game is so incredibly good that it doesn't matter. You made a comment to me earlier where you were saying that you think someone could love this game even if they skipped every single piece of dialogue. Yeah. And I tend to agree with that. Like, obviously, I wouldn't recommend that because I really love the story and the characters and everything. But you could. Like, that's how strong this game is to just play and experience. And it's something that even if you just want a stellar combat system, you've got to try it out. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, and like obviously that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I think just how much fun I had with the VR arena in the Shinra headquarters is pretty much a testament to the idea I'm trying to get at there, which is like even if everything else is kind of a 5, 6 out of 10 in your head, the combat carried me through, and I'm glad it did because it ended up allowing me to enjoy some of the moments toward the end of the game that I might not have gotten to if they hadn't just done such a stellar job with remaking this combat system.
I definitely agree. I think there's no real better way to end it than just praising the hell out of this game's combat because it's just spectacular.
Yeah, I don't have much more to say. I mean, the game as a whole is amazing. I obviously have my issues with it, but there was just never anything that was so much of an issue I didn't want to keep playing. And there's a lot of missed potential here, but that is the result of them having created something so spectacular that it's going to give them room to grow. And that's what's so exciting about the next game to me is, hey, they have set the stage to do. It's almost like this. The next game could be like The Empire Strikes Back in the sense that like they've created something amazing and they have the opportunity to even top that.
Right. It's like you wouldn't be talking about what they can do for the next game if this one hadn't set up such an incredible base. You just be like, whatever, who cares? Like it's just gonna be whatever. Like because this game has such an incredible base, you're sitting there thinking, like, okay, what could have been better? Because it's so good as is. It's like, what are the little things you could do to push it even further? And I think that's a testament to its systems that you have so much passion for it.
Yeah, it's less, I really hope they fix this for the next one, and oh man, like, I hope they add this for the next one.
That 100%. And I think that's the best place to end it. And for Games Gone By, I am Austin.
And I'm Adam.
And thank you for listening.